Greetings from India. You are listening to Business Talk Podcast. I am Deepak, your host. We are delighted to welcome Professors Michael Brownstein and Alex Madva as our distinguished guest on today's podcast episode. Before we begin, let me introduce today's guest. Dr. Michael is the chair of the Department of Philosophy at John Jay College, where he also serves as the chair of the Council of Chairs. Additionally, he organized the weekly philosophy colloquium series at the City University of New York Graduate Center, where he is Deputy Executive Officer of the Philosophy Department. He writes on science and ethics, focusing on applying social science insights to promote change in societies affected by intergroup conflict. His current research explores social change and climate change. Dr. Michael earned his PhD from Penn State and previously studied at Columbia University and Deep Springs College. Our second guest is Professor Alex Madva, Professor of Philosophy, Director of the California Center for Ethics and Policy, and co-director of the Digital Humanities Consortium at Cal Poly Pomona. He is a co-editor of an Introduction to Implicit Bias and the Movement for Black Lives. His research and teaching explores how developments in technology and the social sciences are shaping how we understand the mind and justice, with an emphasis on prejudice, discrimination, and implicit bias. He has run numerous workshops and training sessions on bias, stereotype threat, and imposter syndrome for schools, courts, and wider audiences. Dr. Alex received his BA in Philosophy and English at Tufts University and his MA and PhD from Columbia University, and previously held positions at Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow at UC Berkeley. In this episode, both professors share key insights from their forthcoming book, Somebody Should Do Something: How Anyone Can Help Create Social Change. It is my pleasure to now welcome Professor Michael and Professor Alex to the conversation. Thank you, professors, for graciously accepting our invitation. We truly appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
It's an honor to be here.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. Professors, what inspired you to write Somebody Should Do Something? And how did you decide to combine storytelling, science, and humor in explaining social change?
Well, we had been doing scholarly work on social change for a long time, but we wanted to bring what we had learned to a wider audience, and we also wanted to make it worth reading. Professors who write books sometimes do a formulaic thing where they start each chapter with a 1 to 2 paragraph story and then basically revert to scholarly argument the rest of the way through. And we wanted to be more ambitious than that. The science and the stories and the jokes really led the way when we started writing the book. So much so that in editing, we actually had to go back and unpack the transitions and the introductions and the conclusions to make it clearer and more explicit what we were taking from the stories and so on. And I would say more broadly, there's a case in point here, which is that this is a book about trying to motivate people to try to make the world a better place. And people have to want to do that. They have to want to work to make change. And everybody's busy. Everyone's raising kids or working hard. They have a lot to do. And caring for the collective good feels like an extra thing to a lot of people. And so we wanted to speak directly to that need and to make it clear that social change can be fun, it can be moving and meaningful, and it can be worthwhile to jump into, even if it is demanding.
Yes, Dr. Alex.
I think I'd add, yes, I think I would add to that also that we had each written, more academic papers for a more academic audience. And we are talking about social change in those papers, but how much social change are we really making if only 10 or 15 or 20 other people are reading that paper? And so we thought that for ourselves and the social roles that we occupy, one way that we could maybe have a little bit of a bigger impact was trying to write a book that had all the features that Michael was just describing, something that was more accessible to a wider audience and something that people would actually want to read that might then help motivate them to go on and fight for social change.
You discussed the false choice between improving personal choices and changing systems. Could you explain why this dichotomy is misleading and how your approach reframes it?
Right. So this kind of forced choice shows up everywhere once you're aware to look for it. So, for example, there was a big headline in a Vox op-ed in 2019 that said, "I work for the environmental movement. I don't care if you recycle." And if you read the article, it goes through a whole list of individual level actions and says, that they are pointless, that recycling doesn't really work. We end up burning a lot of the things. A lot of it just gets thrown out. Okay, you can turn off your light bulbs, but then there's still massive corporations that are pumping tons of carbon pollution into the atmosphere. You can get a hybrid car or an EV, but there's still massive amounts of fossil fuels that are being produced. And so the article really makes it clear that there are lots of things you can do at an individual level that aren't going to make a big difference. And then it sort of concludes with these kind of big, vague, gestures towards, okay, so like let's change the whole system. Let's overhaul. Let's hold corporations accountable. Let's pass an international treaty. Let's pass a carbon tax. Let's put a ban on plastics and so on and so forth. And what all of those things, I would agree, are things that we should be fighting for. But it's less clear what each of us as individuals is supposed to do to fight for those things. So, what often happens in these framings is that the things that we as individuals can do, the things that are within our reach, are framed as ineffective, as meaningless, as window dressing. Maybe they only serve to make us feel better and just distract us and let corporations and large governments continue to pollute. So that's one side of the either or choice. And then the other side is, massive system change and revolutions and giant, big changes to the overall structures that shape our lives. But then when we talk about those things, it becomes very obscure what we as individuals can do to move the ball on them, to make those changes. So those things seem beyond our reach. What's within our reach doesn't do anything, and what is important is beyond our reach. And so one of the central challenges that we're trying to address in this book is how to rethink the relationship between individuals and systems when it comes to fighting for social change. And so we try to make the case that there are things that we can do as individuals that can help contribute to larger social changes. But they're often not the kinds of things that corporations and other folks have told us that we should focus on. And so ultimately, we're trying to say we need to think of individual change as part of system change and system change as part of individual change. So the most important things we can do as individuals is work together with others and not just be thinking about, okay, how can I on my own reduce my private carbon footprint, but what can I do in collaboration with other people to put pressure on corporations and governments to make the changes that we need to make. And conversely, we need to think about when we're fighting for big structural changes, we want to think about what kinds of structural changes will make it easy for people to do the right thing. What kinds of structural changes will make it easy for people to live less carbon intensive lifestyles, make it easy for people to become more civically and politically engaged, and so on.
Professor Michael, the book draws on insights from the social sciences about human behavior. What surprising truths about human nature did you discover that challenge conventional thinking about activism and change?
Yeah, so studies of human nature for a long time have been showing that people are very susceptible to the influence of what's outside of them. Liberal families raise liberal kids, conservative families raise conservative kids. So in that case, the family is the outside situation around the individual. People in heterogeneous cities tend to be more tolerant of differences. People who work in an office with a respectful culture tend to be more respectful themselves. So those are all different ways of saying that what's around us and outside of us really has a huge influence on our individual choices. The name for that is often situationism in psychology. One of the things that we discovered and wanted to elaborate on is situationism in reverse, which is to say that if um, if the situation is a huge influence on me. That means that I am the situation for somebody else. If you're my situation, I'm yours. And that's an opportunity for creating change because all of us are somebody else's situation. So I'll give you two examples where I think that insight into human nature really can be leveraged into making change. One is an idea that the economist Robert Frank talks about in his book Under the Influence, which is that if you look at um, the biggest effect of laws against smoking in public, the typical idea is that those laws are good because they prevent secondhand smoke from invading the lungs of people who are not smokers. But really, what those laws do is make smoking in public less of a thing. And so that smoking is not in the situation. And so they create fewer smokers. And that means people are less likely to smoke. Likewise, the biggest predictor of when someone quits smoking is whether their spouse quits. And so that's an opportunity, right? If you want to make a change in someone else's life and you're part of their life, you really have an opportunity there. The second example is more political and it has to do with voting. So, who turns out to vote? Um, there was just a fascinating study showing that college roommates have a huge influence on each other that lasts for many years in terms of whether they're likely to vote. And that's again an example where um, I am your situation, or the roommate is the other roommate's situation. And that really stems from the kind of creatures we are, where we call human beings in the book inside out creatures, because we are so exposed to the influence of what's around us. But that's really an opportunity for all of us to shape the world that shapes other people.
Professor Michael, I would like to continue with the next question. You argue that the most powerful individual choices are those that lead to collaboration. Could you elaborate on how small personal actions can catalyze larger collective movements, perhaps with an examples like Chris Smalls at Amazon?
Sure, yeah. And then Alex might want to add to this. So Chris Smalls was somebody who ended up working as a picker at an Amazon warehouse, which just meant that he was going around finding the boxes that needed to be shipped. Um, and during the COVID pandemic, he was incensed, he was outraged that the workers at the warehouse he was working at in Staten Island in New York City were not being provided with adequate safety gear. And he started talking to coworkers and they organized and they demanded safer personal protective equipment. And it really galvanized him into organizing. And he ended up working to organize the first labor union at an Amazon warehouse, the first successful organizing effort at any Amazon warehouse. He has then gone on to a broader life of activism. And so we really took inspiration from his story because it started small in this very intimate way of trying to have better masks and so on during the pandemic. And it not only caught on with him, but it caught on with others around him. And in the book, we talk about the lessons he and his other organizers learned about the importance of making connections with other people, being there day in and day out, and really like starting the fire small and keeping at it.
Yeah, Dr. Alex.
Yeah, I would add a little bit to that story as well. So part of what makes him a fascinating figure is that he did not set out in the beginning of his life to be a change maker. Originally, he wanted to be a professional NBA player, but he was hit by a car in his youth. Then he wanted to be a hip hop artist, but he ended up having a family, and so that's what in order to provide for his family, he found himself taking jobs at places like Walmart and Home Depot and eventually Amazon, um, uh, just to make ends meet. And it was only when he started seeing injustices at his workplace that he started to get motivated. And initially, it was just about personal protective equipment, but Amazon actually fired him the same day that they held that walkout, and it was an interesting case where they kind of overreacted and lit a fire underneath him. and as well as some of his other central collaborators on his project, such as Derek Palmer and Angelica Maldonado. And another striking feature of what's so powerful about their case, as Michael was alluding to, is the day in, day out working. So last week, or I think maybe 2 weeks ago, you had a fascinating episode about digital citizenship. And it's true that in our increasingly digital lives, the kind of activity we do online can be really important and really powerful. But it's also a tempting mistake to think, okay, if I just tweet online, then I've done my part to advance a social cause. And the Amazon organizers like Angelica Maldonado did have a group thread and an online chat where they were trying to talk to people, but she said that that wasn't really what made the difference. What made the difference was like hanging out in the break room and talking to people and having day in, day out face to face conversations. And so, as Michael was saying in his earlier discussion about how my choices and are your situation, that's part of what it means to take responsibility for the difference we can make in the world is to realize the influence that we can have on other people. And the story of Chris Smalls and Derek Palmer and Angelica Maldonado is an excellent case in point.
Professor Alex, many people feel paralyzed by large-scale issues like climate change or racism. How does your book help readers overcome feelings of resignation or helplessness?
Yeah, I think there's obviously a lot of change happening in the world, and from the perspective of Michael and me and our co-author Daniel Kelly in our forthcoming book, a lot of the changes we're seeing are not changes that we're in favor of, and it can feel really difficult and hopeless that things are heading in a bad direction. But actually, in the book, we describe a whole bunch of different cases, and there are cases where a social movement seemed to accomplish all its goals and then struggled to implement those changes, and things ended up falling apart. But conversely, there are lots of cases where it seemed like a social movement had failed, but nevertheless, they found each other and worked together and succeeded in the long run. And I think one of the I think the message that our choices are, my choices are part of your situation is one of the important sources of hope. But another important impact that our choices can make is also on ourselves. So, for example, some studies find that people who put solar panels on their roof are more likely to become politically engaged in support of environmental causes. And what examples like this illustrate is the possibility that the choices I make today shape the person I become tomorrow. And so, if you're feeling disengaged and if you're not getting involved, that can actually potentially increase your sense of helplessness. But the more involved you become, especially if you're engaged in collaboration with other people, that can actually build up a sense of your own effectiveness as a person, a sense of a desire to be there for the people that you're working with, and it can be a powerful tool against feeling hopeless and helpless in current times.
Professors, while not a how-to manual, your book suggests ways to put ideas into practice. What are some actionable strategies for someone who wants to start making a real difference today?
I'll give you some ideas, not all of the ones that are in the book, but in no particular order. I mean, one theme that I think is running throughout what Alex and I have talked about here is just the importance of talking to other people in our lives. Lots of people feel uncomfortable talking about politics or what they want the world to become or fears they have about the future. But those sorts of conversations can really pay off, as in the roommates study that I talked about a minute ago, where just by sharing ideas about voting, you end up leading another person to become a lifelong voter. There's a problem in the social sciences that's called the problem of pluralistic ignorance, which is just a fancy way of saying that people often don't know what each other don't know. And when it comes to the topics that we cover in the book, whether it's climate change or racism or poverty or homelessness. There's lots of information out there that suggests that people don't know how much other people care about these topics, and that can only be solved by talking about it. So that's one idea, and it's a really easy one, right? Be willing to talk to the people in your lives about the things you care about and what you want the world to become. I think there's another theme running throughout the book, which is stems from something I remember my dad always saying to me when I was a kid, which is that perfect is the enemy of the good. And I think what I take from that is that doing something is usually better than doing nothing. That doesn't mean that the thing you'll do will work, but it might. And if it doesn't, you learn from it. So we have a emphasis throughout the book on being experimental, trying things out, and then documenting what works and what doesn't, analyzing it, and then trying something new. We also talk a lot about using our social roles for change. So everybody has lots of different social roles, whether that's being a parent or a teacher or a boss or a union member. And those roles offer opportunities for creating change, for making the world what we want it to be. And often, when we think in terms of roles, it helps us to get out of the mindset of thinking that each of us is just a drop in the bucket and the bucket is huge. And so, what difference does it make what we do? Because when we think about our roles, we think of ourselves as really part of a community and part of a network. And that means we have an opportunity, rather than being a drop in the bucket, to be something more like the match that lights the fire, right? That helps sow a change that catches on with other people. Um, the last thing I'll say is that we really recommend looking for opportunities, not just to start change, but to help implement and sustain it over time. Because that's very easy to forget about. But there are a litany of examples throughout history where some good change has been implemented right in the beginning and then fell apart when everyone stops paying attention. So, what does that mean in practice? Well, if you work for a company and you care about climate change, one thing you might do is try to get your company to create a sustainability pledge. Lots of that has happened around the world. But another thing you can do is really help push your company to implement and maintain its sustainability pledge, right? To meet it over time. And in some ways, that's a lot harder, but also a lot more important.
Dr. Alex, humors appear throughout the book. How do stories and jokes help convey serious ideas about social change, and why are they important?
That's a great question. I, the book is still remains to be published, and so it remains to be seen whether our jokes are actually funny and resonate with a wide audience. We're optimistic, but we think there are a variety of reasons why a dose of humor can be really valuable in a context like this. The first one is just, look, we're talking the two main examples of large scale social problems that we focus on in the book are racism and the climate crisis. And those can be very heavy topics, and they should be because they are really important and are already have already in history wreaked a lot of havoc and devastated a lot of lives. And we don't flinch, we don't hide from those hard truths in the book. We talk about them openly and honestly, but in given that the book is ultimately trying to not just horrify people, not just freeze people so they feel like overwhelmed by these huge changes, we think a little bit of humor can be a powerful kind of um, injection to help people pivot from just thinking about things in a doom and gloom way towards potentially thinking about, okay, these are really huge problems. I can't solve them on my own, but it's not my job to solve them on my own. But maybe there's some role that I can play in trying to address them. And we think a little bit of levity can help people, adopt that orientation. And we also, to the extent that we want this to be a book that people actually want to read, we don't think it could just be page after page of devastatingly bad news. And so we hope that the book is more engaging and ultimately more inspiring if people want to read it. And a couple well-placed jokes, we hope, are part of how to get there. And I think it's also just a sense in which this book is a reflection of who we are as individuals and not just as scholars. And we can appreciate a good joke, so we were hoping to contribute some as well. I think Michael might want to add a little bit as well.
Just
Yes.
one thing real quickly, which is that um, I don't know if everyone feels this way, but I at least for a long time had the perception that choosing to dedicate one's life or even just any of one's time to trying to make the world better, whether that's trying to reduce homelessness or trying to fight against pollution in the water or the air, is like a slog. Like it's important, but it's unpleasant. And in point of fact, the people who dedicate the most time to combating those injustices say the opposite. They say that they take pleasure from working with other people to make the world better, that it can be joyful to stand there shoulder to shoulder with people to stand up for what's right. And I think we wanted to mirror that it doesn't have to be like taking your medicine to care about justice and to care about fairness and so on. It can really be part of a happy and pleasurable life. And so we hoped the book could make that manifest in some way.
One other thought on that, I think it's not just that people think of fighting for social justice as a slog. They also think the stereotypes about the people who fight for social justice are that they are humorless bummers. This maybe I'll get in trouble for telling this joke, but there's a joke. I heard it from a feminist, so I hope it's okay. Where the joke is, how many feminists does it take to screw in a light bulb? That's not funny. That's the answer to that joke. So, right, and so the whole stereotype there is that feminists don't think jokes are funny, that they're very cold, and that they're not people that you want to actually hang out with. And so, as Michael was saying, thinking that people who do actually fight for social change enjoy it, they appreciate the community, and that they are also able to laugh and tell jokes with each other. And so it's important to bear in mind that fighting for social change doesn't mean sacrificing your happiness and just being a cold bummer all the time.
Professors, what the most common misconception people have about what it means to contribute to social change? And how does your framework correct it?
I think it's hard to pick just one. I think we've touched on a number throughout this conversation. I think one of them is one of the legacies of being brought up in an individualistic culture like the United States is thinking that social change is just a matter of these superhuman heroes. And I think this also builds off of what we were just talking about a moment ago in terms of humor. People who are incredibly serious and hardworking and just constantly dedicated to the cause and willing to sacrifice everything. And our book does profile a number of folks like that, but our book also profiles a number of people who are much more ordinary and just found themselves in a situation where there was an opportunity to make a difference, and they did. And the way social dynamics work is that sometimes that small change can cascade and go viral and end up building into something much larger. So I think one of the big misconceptions to tackle is just appreciating that social change can often be much more in reach than it seems.
Professor Michael, social change is often slow and hard to quantify. How should individuals think about the impact of their actions when results may not be immediately visible?
It's fortuitous that you asked this question because Alex and I just wrote a guest essay in the New York Times about this very question last week. Um, we took inspiration from a decision that the Democrats in the Texas House made in response to an effort that the Republicans created to gerrymander the state in the mid cycle, in the middle of a 10-year cycle, which is highly unusual in the United States. And what the Democrats did is they left the state in order to prevent the Republicans from having a quorum in order to vote on this proposal. Now, when they did this, the criticism was that they were going to lose, right? That eventually they were going to have to come back. The governor, who's a Republican, had the power to call a second special session. And so why do it? In fact, they did lose in the short term. They eventually had to come back to the state, and the gerrymander was passed. But we argued in our piece in the Times that they actually might have won in the longer term, because what they did is they inspired other people to join the fight. They inspired the governors of California and New York, for instance, to respond with gerrymanders of their own, which is unfortunate in the short term, because I think what most people want is a federal law preventing any of this. But you can't, as the saying goes, like, bring a knife to a gunfight. And so the Democrats can't just unilaterally disarm here. They have to fight back. And so the challenge is getting the rest of the party to fight. And that's what they did. They inspired others to join the fight. This came to us because in the book we draw on research looking at activists in some of the most repressive countries across the world who fight battles that they know they'll lose. Right? What causes people to turn up at a demonstration against an autocrat, knowing that they might be beaten, that they might be thrown in jail, that they're very unlikely to overthrow the repressive regime that day? And the answer is because they feel a connection and an obligation to each other. And that's what the Texas Democrats helped to foster. And it's the kind of change that I think it's crucial to remember happens even when victory seems a long way off. I think the other thing I would say in answering your question is that it often feels like who knows how long it's going to take, right? You can't really see the change coming, and that can be a daunting sort of a feeling because you never have a roadmap for like how just what it's going to take to win. But you can turn that realization on its head, because if you don't know how long it's going to take, that means that change could be right around the corner. The big moment, the precipitous event, the crucial decision could come tomorrow. And I think that's inspiration to keep at it. And so that's one of the points we really press in the book.
Michael's answer appropriately focused on large-scale social changes, large collective efforts to fight against gerrymandering, and big efforts that we have. But I think there's also a version of this question that is important to think about just at the small and local level, about sometimes our efforts not being immediately visible. And it picks up on a number of things that we've talked about so far in the conversation. So if for people who are chronically online, they might think that all we're doing all the time is screaming at each other, yelling, constantly fighting, that everything is really toxic. But the truth is, and this goes back to points Michael was making about pluralistic ignorance and the value of talking to people, is that the problem still remains the problem that it's always been, which is passive bystanding. People don't do enough. And one reason that people don't even, try to bring up issues with the people they know is that they're afraid that the person is going to blow up at them and that it's going to be counterproductive and it's just going to make things worse. And one message that's really clear from the social science research is that we have to draw a distinction between what is the immediate reaction that I get when I try to bring up something with someone. If I see discrimination and I try to engage that person and I try to have a conversation with them, they might get really angry at me and I might think I'm just making things worse. But the social science research is really clear that even if in that immediate moment it seems like I'm not making a difference, or maybe it seems like it's counterproductive, that person may very well go on to change their behavior tomorrow or the next week and on into the future. And so it's really important to bear in mind that just because we don't see the immediate fruits of our actions, it's nevertheless still possible and indeed pretty likely that those efforts will have downstream effects that we don't see. And we have to have a measure of trust in our capacity to do that if we're going to keep pushing for change.
Very insightful. Professors, my last question. If readers take your message to heart, what kind of societal transformation do you hope to see? And how does your book inspire that vision of collective action?
I'll go first, I
Well,
guess. Sorry. Um, I mean, I think many people want to do something to make the world fairer or more just, cleaner, healthier, safer. And so I think if people who read this book feel like doing any of that work is more in reach for them, I'll be deeply satisfied. I think if people are more willing or able to do that work together with other people, even better. Specifically, if you ask me, I want to see the energy transition globally happen as quickly as possible. It's old-fashioned to say along different lines, but I want to see people treated not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And so I hope the work we've done in the book inspires action in service of those ends. I also desperately want to see collective action to preserve liberal democracy around the world and the rule of law. Both of those things are fragile and under threat. And they are the things that make possible so much of what so many of us take for granted. So those are high on my list for the changes that I want to see, at least.
Dr. Alex.
yeah, so there are specific sorts of changes that folks like Michael and me want to see happen, such as addressing the climate crisis and addressing racism. And we focus a lot on those kinds of examples in the book, but we talk about a wide array of other examples of social movements from a wide array of political perspectives. And I think our broader hope is just for folks to get more civically engaged and to try to get out there and talk to people. And the only way that we're going to combat the kind of polarization and the echo chambers and filter bubbles that are shaping reality now is if people get out there and try to talk to people, not just tweeting at people who are in a different social bubble, but really trying to have those conversations. So, um, if I mean, just to take one example, the 2020 election in the United States had the highest turnout ever in an election. Hundreds of millions of people voted, but there were still 80 million people who didn't vote, right? And that's a really big number. And although there's definitely one side that I would like them all to vote for, I would also just be really happy if they voted. And I would be really happy if they tried to talk to each other. And so a key message in our book is when we're thinking about trying to make a difference it's not about how do I become an agent of change, but how do I recognize that I'm already an agent of change? And how do I recognize that I'm already situated in a big, complicated network of social relationships, and I'm already making a difference, and to take responsibility for that and try to become more civically engaged. And I think if we want to tackle challenges like democracy and the climate crisis and racism, it starts with people getting off the couch and talking to each other.
Listeners, we sincerely thank Professors Michael Brownstein and Dr. Alex Madva for sharing their insights and expertise with us today. Their perspectives have made this discussion truly enriching. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to welcome you back in our next episode. Thank you so much, Professor Michael and Professor Alex, for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks so much. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks, Deepak. This was really awesome. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your audience.
Thank you.